Welcome to the Union News Podcast. The UK's only all things union show, produced for your downloadable digital delight and appreciation. In this episode, International ITUC Deputy General Secretary Owen Tudor on what international solidarity means in practice. Plus, Mel Simms on a green budget opportunity missed, and Josiah Mortimer's Radical Roundup. Hello, welcome to Union Jews, the UK's only all things union podcast. I'm Simon Sapper, and here we have a snappy, sassy show for you as ever. We've got Mel Simms in her Thought for the Week, who's going to be talking about why the budget was a missed opportunity in terms of a green transformation. We've got Josiah Mortimer's Radical Roundup, all the stories that you may well have missed from the mainstream media that affect trade unions and the work that we do. And our special guest this episode is Owen Tudor, Deputy General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation, talking about international solidarity and organising on a global scale. We'll hear from all our guests in just a moment, but right from the off, front and centre, I want to give a plug to the health service unions, who are reacting with absolute disbelief and horror at the government's announcement that they're slating a 1% pay rise for NHS staff. And the government thinks they're being generous. And Tory MPs are saying, well, this is very good news. We're surprised that there's a kickback. It just shows how tone-deaf politicians can be sometimes. Now, the government has put a 1% increase in its budget. It's referred the matter to the pay review body, which advises the government on appropriate rates of pay for a very wide range of NHS grades. I bet you that actually the pay review body will come back to government with a recommendation for something that's around 2%. And the government will say, well, yeah, okay, we have to cede to this recommendation from the pay review body. And we'll all feel grateful because we've got 2% instead of 1%. And then, of course, you get the debate about where does the additional 1% get taken from in order to balance the budget. I mean, that's a different debate, probably for a different podcast as well. But that's what I reckon is going to happen. Now, in the meantime, Unison new General Secretary Christine McIntyre has said, I tell you what we'll do. Thursday the 11th of March, Thursday the 1st of April, let's have a slow hand clap to show the government exactly what the people of Britain think about this. 8 p.m. on your doorsteps or your balconies, a slow hand clap to show just what you think of a 1% pay rise for the most frontline staff. Here's Josiah with the rest of this week's industrial news in his Radical Roundup.
Thanks, Simon. First up, Unite says it's mobilising a standing army of 30,000 workplace reps to promote the benefits of the COVID-19 vaccines to workplaces across the UK. Unite is particularly keen to assist those hard-to-reach groups which have been worst hit by the virus, but who might need more reassurance about vaccine safety. The union also repeated its call for an urgent uplift in statutory sick pay, stating that the country needs more than one club in its bag to beat the disease. The union has produced a raft of promotional campaign materials, including films for its million-plus membership across the UK, urging workers and their loved ones to get a jab. Next up, the Green Party of England and Wales has backed trade union calls for a 15% pay rise for all NHS health and care staff. Members overwhelmingly backed the proposal at the party's virtual conference, with the call coming in response to the government's recommendations for NHS staff to be given a pay rise of just 1%. When taking into account inflation, that amounts to a real terms pay cut. Both Unite and GMB, unions which represent health workers, are calling for a 10% pay rise. The government's facing mounting pressure to concede to union demands, with Unite and Nursing Union, the Royal College of Nursing, understood to be considering balloting its members for strike action. And now, energy companies are exposing staff to unnecessary COVID risks, the Unison Union has said. The UK's leading energy suppliers, including many of the big six, are needlessly forcing staff to enter up to 80 homes a day each during the pandemic to take meter readings. The union is calling on the government to intervene and class meter reading as non-essential work. Of the dozens of energy suppliers, only British Gas has stopped in-home readings in England and Wales. The Scottish Government has already recognised the clear risk to both employees and homeowners and stopped readings until further notice. It's not all rosy at British Gas, however. Engineers there walked out for their 27th day of strike action last Friday after they overwhelmingly rejected a revised offer from the company at ACAS. Thousands took part in the ballot, with more than 3/4 of gas and electrical engineers voting against a deal from the company after the firm decided to take its fire and rehire plan off the table. The workers down tools for 4 days, returning to work this Tuesday. GMB's executive has ruled that action could continue to mid-April in this deadlock dispute. And finally, we report on new research from Unite, which has proposed a new industrial strategy for post-Brexit trade. A report from the union calls for a fresh approach to support coordination between reps across industries and Unite sectors at the workplace level. It finds the vast majority of Unite reps interviewed see a threat to their site from Brexit, putting jobs and conditions at risk. Unite reps want to see a new collective bargaining strategy across sectors to benefit workers throughout supply chains and to counter the industrial impact of trade. Good news though, the majority of reps also reported using digital tools to organise in the pandemic, with 2/3 reporting a positive experience with these tools, suggesting they could help sustain supply chain coordination. And that's it from this week's Radical Roundup on the Union Jews podcast. Catch the full Radical Roundup on leftfootforward.org on Wednesday. And back to you, Simon. Thanks.
Thank you, Josiah. And don't forget, Mel Simms will be with us later in the show for her Thought for the Week, all about how the budget is a missed opportunity for a green transformation of the economy. But now to our special guest, Owen Tudor. I've known Owen for many, many years, and I was delighted that he agreed to come on the show to talk about his still relatively new role as one of the Deputy General Secretaries at the International Trade Union Confederation, a huge global trade union organisation. And we spoke about lots of things, how you work on a global level, what international solidarity means in reality, and the Save Lives at Work campaign that he's spearheading. Here he is. Owen Tudor, Deputy General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. Very welcome to the Union Jews podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So, Owen, I think perhaps the place to start is especially for listeners who are unfamiliar with the international trade union landscape, is the ITUC is a phenomenal organisation, 200 million workers through 332 national trade union centres across 163 countries. Astonishing, but it's not how does it work and how do you interrelate with other global trade union bodies?
Well, I've been doing it for 2 years, so when I find out how it works, I'll let you know.
Not intuitive then.
No, I often have started saying to people that if we were a country, we would be certainly one of the 10 biggest in the world, and actually, since we're made up entirely of adults, actually we're one of the top 2 or 3 countries in the world in that sense in terms of adults. So it is absolutely mammoth, and we actually refer to countries and territories as well. If you ever look up on the web which countries there are, you will get lots of different answers because there are members of the United Nations, there are organizations which have state functions, all that sort of stuff. So the world itself is very complicated. The trade union movement, in some ways, doubly so, but actually all united by the fact that in reality, people at work have the same problems wherever they are, and a lot has changed over time. And that sometimes is a bit like distance. I have told people for many years that my maternal grandfather was a street seller. He used to pick up bread from a bakery in the morning, and he had to go out and sell it. And if he didn't sell it, he didn't get any money for it. He would pay over the money. My uncle and aunt on my father's side were domestic workers at a time when domestic work was a huge part of the economy. But they weren't in some developing country or anything like that. The grandfather was in Cardiff and the uncle and aunt were in Plymouth. it's distance that very often separates different experiences of work's time rather than geography. So the international trade union movement, to answer your actual question, is made up of that there is the International Trade Union Confederation, which with various antecedents has been around for over 100 years. The TUC in Britain has been a part of that all the way through. There have been different international organisations over the years. There is still a predominantly state-funded institution called the World Federation of Trade Unions. The ITUC was formed about 14, 15 years ago as partly a merger between what used to be the International Confederation of Free Trade Unions and the World Confederation of Labour, which was a predominantly Christian trade union body, although we also pulled in some other trade unions at the time to make a wholly new organisation. We represent essentially national trade union centres. So right. in the UK, the TUC. There are also a whole load of structures at sectoral level called global union federations, to which individual trade unions in Britain would affiliate. So, you've got a Transport Workers Federation, actually based in Southwark, as it happens, to which people like Unite and RMT and so on are affiliated. There's the Public Services International, which Unison is obviously the biggest affiliate to. There's a private services sector organisation, a manufacturing organisation, down to smaller organisations like the International Federation of Journalists right. and musicians even have their own institution. And so there's lots of work that, we work in concert. We have a body called the Council of Global Unions where we all meet up. And there are also other international trade union organisations, such as, for instance, we have a body called the Trade Union Advisory Committee to the OECD, which has an automatic input to the OECD's work, but is a wholly independent trade union structure. And then there are other regional organisations. There's the European Trade Union Confederation, which is a rather different beast because it covers a particular supranational government institution, the EU. But the ITUC has regional organisations covering Africa, the Americas, a sub-regional one covering the Arab world, the Asia Pacific, and a pan-European regional council, which brings together ITUC members in Western Europe and stretches all the way to Vladivostok in the east.
Wow.
And so there's lots of those different organizations. And then there are even smaller sub-regional federations, the East Africa Trade Union Confederation, things like that, the Caribbean Labour Council.
I mean, I understand absolutely the need for supranational global federations to interface with organizations like the OECD, the UN, ILO, and so on. And I understand the value of coordination and of sharing information, disseminating best practice. But is there not a risk that there are so many different elements and stakeholders to coordinate that the coordination actually eclipses any output from that? How does an organization like the ITUC manage that challenge?
So, number one, keep our focus on what will assist working people in their daily lives. That's our absolute number one objective, is to improve working people's daily lives. And as long as you put that front and centre, then a lot of the other coordination stuff just becomes something that you actually have to do. At the moment, for instance, the International Trade Union Confederation has 5 priorities. They are jobs, rights, equality, social protection, and inclusion, which covers particular issues of peace and so on. So those are our objectives. They can be fairly easily addressed to individual people's individual working lives. Obviously, they act on them collectively and so on. So we put those front and centre, and then different people can help do different things and help deliver different things. We try not to spend all of our lives in meetings. I mean, one of the ways that we do that, by the way, is, one of my culture shifts moving from the TUC with its annual week-long conference by the seaside in Britain to the International Trade Union Confederation, which only meets as a group every 4 years. So, so we try and do it more lightly. One of the experiences of the pandemic has been an enormous shift to doing a lot of that work online.
Yes.
And the time we spend talking to each other in international institutions and things like that is very often quite useful. The time we used to spend flying to the meetings, very often not so much. and that we've been able to cut out by doing so much of our work online, and it's something that we will continue to do even after the pandemic. Quite definitely.
I mean, on a nation state level, I know the trade unions I talk to here are just liberated by not having to spend so much traveling time. So when you get to a kind of global scale or an international scale, it must be huge. Dividend must be huge.
One of the things I always used to say was that if you actually look at trade union structures, most of which actually derive from the late 19th century, they're quite often guided by the fact that, well, you had to call everyone together in one place to have a discussion. And so you have annual conferences where representatives of union members go along to them because you couldn't all go.
Indeed.
And actually that whole representative structure is based on the fact that you needed to travel, because we invented most of our structures before the telephone.
Absolutely. It's strange how legacy issues like that continue to loom large over the way we organise, the way we do our work. In terms of the specific campaigns under those 5 main headings, Owen, I know the Save Lives at Work issue is close to your heart and is a major concern for the ITUC. What is that campaign and what's it seeking to achieve?
So the main thing that we're seeking to achieve is saving lives at work, as you know, sort of the hashtag. It says on the tin. Actually, yeah, exactly. The hashtag is designed to say everything about what we're trying to do. It is a staggering and just ghastly, tragic figure. Every minute of every day of every year around the world, 5 people die as a result of their work.
My goodness.
Every minute.
That is
and that's
shocking.
an enormous toll that needs to come down. And the really worrying thing is that you know, sort of obviously people die of all sorts of things all the time, and you know, it's sort of inherent in living. But every one of those workplace deaths is preventable. None of them actually had to happen. You know, they could all have been prevented if people had taken the steps that are required to deal with that. So that's what Save Lives at Work is about. The way we want to deliver that initially is we're trying to persuade governments and employers globally through the International Labour Organization, which brings all those people together from all of the countries of the world, to make occupational health and safety what's known as a fundamental right at work. Right. At the moment, the fundamental rights are freedom from child labour, freedom from forced labour, freedom from discrimination at the workplace, and freedom of association, i.e. the freedom to join a trade union and engage in collective bargaining. We want to add occupational health and safety to that list. It is long overdue, and what that change would effect it would be giving it. I mean, it would have some direct effect automatically. There are loads of trade agreements around the world and supply chain agreements which say we will incorporate the fundamental rights. If you just add a fundamental right, it automatically knocks on into all of those agreements.
Yeah.
But probably more importantly, what it will do is it will give an impetus to action by governments, employers and unions to do more about prevention, having more safety reps at the workplace, having more safety committees, doing more to tackle health and safety problems rather than simply, you know, sort of record another death in the register.
Yeah, as you say, I mean, there's a lot that can be done by designing in, hardwiring in safety. And you're right. I think when you talk about supply chains as being a way into this, because if you have a supply chain agreement that says you will get X quantity of goods from place A to place B at the speed of sound, you're putting a huge pressure and a huge risk on the people who produce or gather in the stuff and the people who transport it. And of course, you know, while lobbying of the ILO continues, there's nothing to stop trade sectors or nation states moving on this themselves. So yeah, given the difficulty, given the fact that I guess the ILO, like the ITUC, it doesn't meet in permanent session, there are only certain windows in which to make a decision. When's the earliest that the ILO could make a decisive move on this? Not, as I say, not that one is utterly dependent on that for success, but when could it be inserted in that way?
The decision to move on this was taken at the 2019 International Labour Conference, which was its centenary conference. It was, 100 years since it was since it was founded, one of the decisions it took was to make health and safety a fundamental right. But to give effect to that decision has taken a little bit longer because, frankly, of employer foot dragging on the issue. The ILO's governing body, which again is a tripartite body, trade unionists, employers and governments, are meeting in Geneva in a few days' time to decide the agenda for the 2021 annual conference of the ILO and the 2022 conference. At the moment, employers and governments are trying to suggest that we should take this decision in 2022. We're saying, why wait? Remember that the decision to do this was essentially taken before the pandemic.
Yeah. Since
then, COVID-19 has demonstrated above any doubt that health and safety is fundamental to the way people do their jobs. And so we're saying you can do it at the 2021 conference in June, which itself will be a virtual conference. Yes. I mean, it's entirely possible to do these things virtually and to reach agreements virtually in cyberspace. So we're saying do it now. The alternative is doing it next year. But as you say, no reason not to start acting like it's a fundamental right as soon as possible. On the 28th of April, trade unionists around the world celebrate isn't quite the right word. Commemorate International Workers' Memorial Day. And we've given the theme of health and safety being a fundamental right. That's the focus of our activity around that day. Now, you mentioned supply chains. Obviously, that's one of the examples of global trade unionists, global trade unionism in action, because we are sort of in if you're talking about food, it's farm to fork. If you're talking about production of clothing, it's from the cotton farms in Uzbekistan to the factories in Bangladesh to the people transporting the goods around, the International Transport Workers Federation that I mentioned, to the people selling it to you, either in an offline or an online shop. And because trade unionists bring all those people together, we're in a perfect position to track that supply chain and make sure that the employers who are involved in every stage of that supply chain are also reminded of their responsibilities. And one of our other campaigns at the moment is to get action at the ILO, at the OECD, through their multinational enterprise guidelines, through a UN treaty on due diligence, on companies making sure that they abide by legal requirements and collectively bargained agreements all the way through their supply chains.
Well, if anyone doubts the need for a global perspective in trade union terms, you just have to listen back to the last couple of minutes of our conversation, because you can't ensure that the worker voice, the worker view is heard and is respected in any other way other than by organizing globally when you've got global supply chains to deal with, for example. And I think that's a very strong illustration. What are the sort of things that either the ITUC is either aware of or is asking to happen then for Workers' Memorial Day this year? Because it's only, as we're talking, it's only about 6 or 7 weeks away now. So not too early for people to start thinking about it.
Absolutely. And there are lots of local trade unionists and union branches around the UK, but also all over the world who already mark this day. So you could do something that is purely commemorative. A lot of organizations simply lay a wreath or plant a tree or do something like that, but not on their own, as a way of getting publicity for the argument and so on. But we also regularly ask people, carry out a safety inspection at your workplace. Yeah. Actually get the safety reps to go round and identify what some of the problems are and what can be done about those things. Hold a public meeting if those are possible by the end of April in the UK. But make your case. Make your case on the media, and in particular on social media. We have a very, actually, strangely enough, last year, which was at the beginning of the pandemic, we had the biggest ever mobilization for International Workers' Memorial Day that we've ever had. And we can't help feeling that one of the reasons for that was that people actually were able to connect with each other without having to set up a meeting or something like that, or go somewhere special. They could do it from their workplace, which in that case was very often their home.
Well, but also I think that suddenly everyone's realised the importance, as you say, of health and safety at work, and everyone has, of necessity, I suppose, been empowered to think about just the everyday things they do in a different way from a health and safety perspective, because the threat is real and ever present everywhere. So, in terms of safe ways of working, everything from washing your hands to wearing PPE to changing the way you interact with people, that affects everyone. And
if, for instance, you're working from home, then, a lot of the things that, for instance, office workers take for granted about the fact that their employer will, to be honest, very often only because they've been pressed to do it by a union safety rep, their employer will make sure that the desk they're sat at is ergonomically not going to give them back strain or something like that. Once they're back at home, what do they do about that? How do you deal with that? So unions have been putting a lot of work over the last year for those people working at home to actually look at sort of making sure that the workplace that people have got at home is ergonomically sound, isn't going to cause them even other problems. And of course, there's the issue of isolation, which people have been suffering when they've been working at home. But obviously, for many people at work, it's those frontline workers who are actually still engaged in interacting with the public and therefore exposing themselves to risk. But there was a landmark study in New York which found that the residents of an aged home care facility were 33% less likely to contract COVID if the nursing home was union organised than if it wasn't union organised.
That is a great stat.
It wasn't even the fact that sort of we've got loads of statistics going back from years demonstrating that unionised workplaces are safer for the workforce than the non-union ones. A study's just come out again from Ontario in Canada, for instance, showing that in large workplaces they are up to 45% safer if there's a union present. But that fact about the nursing homes demonstrates that union safety reps and union environments actually make the customers, in this case the residents of the home, safer as well, because of all the things that our people put in place in terms of preventive and protective measures.
Absolutely. I wonder, do you see on an international level, Owen, a sort of an organising dividend from COVID, which is a kind of difficult thing to say, but nevertheless, as you'll know, in the UK, unions have very much been on the front foot in terms of contributing to public policy, being very innovative about how they continue to support members, and have seen generally an increase in union membership. Is that replicated on an international level, or are actually the questions of distance and circumstance so diverse that you can't really pick it up?
Nope. You can pick it up. Obviously, a large number of people have been losing their jobs as a result of the pandemic, and that very often impacts on union membership and so on. So we've always got to be cautious about this and recognise that very often, actually, just as many workers are facing safety issues as a result of the pandemic, many more are facing the loss of their jobs. The ILO estimates up to 400 million jobs lost around the world as a whole, more than 1 billion informal sector workers economically impacted by the effects of the pandemic. So enormous economic shocks around the world that have caused enormous problems for union organisation. But one of the things we have noticed all over the world, we've done a series of surveys about what unions have been doing, and they have really stepped up. I've never been prouder of the trade union movement than seeing how they've reacted to the pandemic and what they've delivered. And very often in workplace after workplace all over the world, what unions have been able to demonstrate during the pandemic is that there is only one person who has got the back of the workers, and that's the union. and they've been able to secure all sorts of things. Sort of from whether it's the extension of the furlough scheme in Britain, which actually originally was a union, something that Francis O'Grady went and crossed swords with Rishi Sunak about at the beginning of the pandemic, and now continuing it as well. That is an enormous boost to people, and unions are finding that they're getting the result of that. But so partly it's just, well, unions are delivering for working people, and working people are responding by joining unions in greater numbers. So there are actually parts of the world where there are now more trade union members than there were a year ago because of the effects of the pandemic. Very often, by the way, in those parts of the world where union membership had been declining up until now in developed economies. In developing economies, it is a much more difficult situation because so many people have been losing their jobs and their livelihoods. But if you look at Nigeria, for instance, where our global president comes from, is the president of the Nigeria Labour Congress. They have negotiated a whole raft of measures with the government that have protected people's jobs, protected people's incomes, and they're seeing a response in terms of greater union membership. There is another aspect, however, to the pandemic, which we touched on earlier, which is also being used by unions, which is that the intervention of new technology, and the fact that whereas, of course, sort of the traditional union recruitment exercise is you go around a workplace and you get people to sign the union card and all that sort of stuff. Because people aren't in workplaces as much, in a number of places, the example we had of Fijian teachers, for instance, where the union was having enormous difficulty getting access to the workplace, but as soon as everyone was sent home, well, they could go to the local village and they could recruit in the local village without having to go near the workplace and be kept away by the employer. And in other circumstances, unions have turned enormously to recruiting people online. Now, sort of back at the TUC, Francis and I actually ran a project 20 odd years ago of trying to get unions to switch to online recruitment and so on. And so, a couple of years ago when my son went to work, he was slightly surprised to find that he could find a union application form on the website, but he had to print it off to fill it in and submit it to the union concerned. I will spare their blushes by not mentioning which union it was. But so unions have shifted enormously to doing it online. And one crucial thing that has also impacted unions during this time is that they have relearned. In fact, it's not learned. This is not new. And organisers, the best organisers, have always known it, have always operated this way. The best way to recruit someone to the trade union movement, we used to say the best way was to ask them. Actually, it isn't. It's to listen. The best way to recruit people into the union is to listen to them, to find out what they think, what they want, and then deliver it for them and give it to them. And actually, the fact that online meetings and online engagement is very much more often two-way than the sort of, standing on a stage with a megaphone or something like that, has actually encouraged a number of unions around the world to get involved rather more in listening to potential members rather than talking to them. I mean,
absolutely.
The people we want to talk to are the employers, because we want to convey the messages that our members are telling us to those employers and saying, this is what you need to do to meet our members' needs.
Yeah, there's an irony, isn't there, in the sense that the challenge of distance is absolutely, it's absolutely transformed when you can meet virtually. And the problems of isolation are also transformed by actually being able to meet virtually. I mean, one last question really before we wrap up. And I mean, I thank you for your enthusiasm is infectious. But
that may not be quite such a good thing now in the current climate. Actually, infectiousness is a downside.
Choose a different word, perhaps. But as you said earlier in our discussion, you've been in your current role for a little more than 2 years, and before that, you were at the TUC. What's the main difference between working within a national trade union centre as opposed to working for an international trade union centre, or isn't there any?
Actually, surprisingly few. When I was doing the handover with my predecessor as the Deputy General Secretary at the ITUC, he was an old Dutch trade unionist who'd been doing it for a while, and he started taking me through all sorts of things about how the job operated. And I said, "So you mean it's exactly the same as the job I was doing back in Britain?" I mean, so there are huge differences, in terms of people's personal experiences and so on. If you're, so I was at one of my sort of early experiences in this job was addressing a group of strikers in Turkey at a meeting. I'd actually gone there to talk to a tripartite conference organised by the Turkish employers, but there was a local industrial dispute going on at the time, and obviously you don't want to just fly in, talk to the employers and the government, and fly out again without interacting with some actual workers. So I went along to the picket line and spoke at that picket line. I have no idea if they had any real idea who I was, or or what I was doing there, but they were grateful for the support. And so, so their experience of strike, I sort of said, well, this is Turkey, isn't it a bit, sort of, I wasn't personally worried, but isn't there a bit of danger about picketing? And they said, no, we have a legal right to do this sort of stuff in Turkey. And you go, well, that's odd. Not sure you'd have a legal right to do what you're doing in Britain. Sort of. It's so there are lots of different experiences, and I've spoken at mass rallies in India. Now, a mass rally in Britain is a different thing from a mass rally in India.
Yeah, there's a question of scale, I would imagine.
There is a question of scale. But there's also, because every time sort of, a new delegation arrived, they would march into the rally with their band going and all that sort of stuff. It was like that, sort of trying to address the Durham Miners Gala or the Tolpuddle Martyrs Rally, but actually not once everyone's been nice and sat down and started listening to the speeches. You would actually be putting the two things together. The march and the speeches would be happening all at the same time, and so on. There is a relationship with our affiliates, and they are people who, maybe on a different level, different geographical level, are representing larger groups of people and so on. But they are fundamentally all representing people that work with the same problems as they have. There are issues of language, and there are issues about how cultures of trade unionism have evolved and are different and things like that. But to be honest, I went to the first conference of Unite when it had been constructed out of a merger of essentially 3 unions, several of which had been themselves the product of merger. And the differences of culture existed within just a British and Irish organisation that had come together from different industries. These things sort of affect you, whether you're trying to put together a print worker and a finance worker, or a worker from the Pacific Islands and a worker from a nuclear power plant in America. They're all workers at the end of the day, and they all want the same thing out of their union.
Owen Tudor, thank you very much indeed. My thanks to Owen for a genuinely wide-ranging discussion. We went halfway around the world, didn't we? And it's very interesting to get that global perspective on what unions can do and how they can engage with each other, coordinate, collaborate, to monitor things like supply chains that cross international boundaries. Then, of course, there's the, I suppose, unsurprising statistics that union workplaces are safer for customers and clients as well as employees. And sitting above all this, the reason why we do the stuff that we do, which is the appalling level of avoidable, preventable deaths at work. An ongoing campaign. For sure, you can find all the resources, all the background information, all the signposting you need. If you head over to the makesyouthink.com website and look in the blog section, you'll find the companion blog to this podcast. All the organizations and all the interactions, all the stuff that Owen and I were talking about, much more information there. Now it's time for the week with Mel Simms, Professor of Work and Employment at the University of Glasgow. This week, Mel takes a look at the budget and ponders whether or not it really is the vehicle for a green transformation, or whether it's just another missed opportunity.
This week, I've been thinking about the importance of unions to green jobs, The UK's finance minister, or as we rather archaically call him, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, announced the budget to Parliament this week, and it was a real missed opportunity to incentivise green jobs in the recovery as we eventually move away from the COVID pandemic. He did announce a number of measures to address climate change, including investment bonds that will allow people to invest in schemes that support green projects. And living in Scotland, it was also notable to me that there were continued plans to invest to support the Aberdeen area, which has historically been at the heart of the oil and gas industries in the UK, and to support the transition away from oil and gas towards environmental technologies. And these are undoubtedly important initiatives. They're essential in creating and supporting good jobs to replace those strategically important and high value industries. But they're a long way from putting green jobs at the heart of the economic and social recovery beyond the COVID pandemic. And unions really need to be at the centre of campaigning for those developments. There are real opportunities, for example, to invest in improving the environmental efficiency of the UK's ageing housing stock. And it would require state support both to develop the technologies, but also for the skills around installation of those technologies. But it would undoubtedly yield essential progress towards the UK's climate change goals, and of course would create a large number of good jobs. There are also real opportunities for governments to support areas such as offshore wind, electric vehicle production, improvement of transport infrastructure and carbon capture, for example. All of those need unions to be at the table, ensuring that the UK's workforce is appropriately skilled and able to adapt to the challenges that would be necessary, all the way through from blue sky science through to the installation and application of successful technologies. The absence of measures to specifically address workforce changes in this week's budget was both disappointing and a really considerable missed opportunity. Campaign organisations, including the union movement, need to keep being very, very clear about the mutual gains to workers, to the economy, to society, and of course to the world's climate of a green jobs budget in the future. And to keep emphasising the fact that we can't continue to keep kicking the can down the road.
Thank you very much indeed, Mel. Another fine contribution. I'd hope you agree, listeners. Links to more information about a green transformation can be found in the blog post that accompanies this podcast. That's over on the makesyouthink.com website. But the whole issue of a green transformation, what the trade union interest in that is, what the involvement needs to be to make the transition effective, I think that's something we're going to come back to. I think that would make a very interesting, riveting, necessary podcast episode. Do you agree? We'd like to hear your views on that and anything else you've heard on the show. Well, we're nearly out of time for this week's episode, but as usual, I just want to give a shout out to my friends and colleagues in the Labour Radio Podcast Network, a portal through which you can access over 70 trade union linked shows. You can access that at labourradionetwork.org, and I do hope you'll pay them a visit soon and see just what a wide range of material is available out there, including an excellent piece that Chris Garlock from the Union City radio show has put together of Pete Seeger singing that absolute classic Solidarity Forever, but overlaid with some of the comments from President Biden that are very much pro-union, pro-Labour. You can hear a sample from that song after the closing credits to this show. It's been a pleasure to have your company for this last half hour or so. I really hope you've enjoyed the show. It's made you think, given you some food for thought. If you want to comment on anything, if you've got ideas for future guests on the show, if you want to follow up any of the issues we've discussed, you can, as you know, email us at unionjews@makesyouthink.com, tweet us at JewsUnion. Please rate us on the podcast platform of your choice. It really is very much appreciated and helps boost the reach of the show no end. You can also subscribe to receive automatic updates whenever a new episode of the show is released, which could be particularly important in the coming weeks because, sadly, this is the last episode of the present series. We've covered an awful lot of ground in the last 8 weeks or so. We will be back, all things being equal, for Series 4 in a couple of months or so, and in between now and then, we may well have the odd special to throw your way as well. If you subscribe, you will know exactly what's happening and get links to the episodes just as soon as they are released. So a heartfelt thanks to Owen, but particularly to Mel and to Josiah for their fantastic contributions week after week. I hope you've enjoyed them as much as I've had. My thanks, as I say, to you for listening, for sharing, for streaming, for rating, for emailing, for tweeting. Without you, this show would be nothing. I'm very excited because I've just had the chance to book my COVID jab. I hope that opportunity comes to all of us, all of you listening, and your friends and family just as soon as is possible. So, in the meantime, take good care, watch out for each other, be kind, and I'll see you around on the next episode of Union Jews. The Union Jews podcast is presented by me, Simon Sapper. It is a Makes You Think production.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever for the Union.
America wasn't built by Wall Street. It was built by the middle class, and unions built the middle class. Unions put power in the hands of workers. They level the playing field. They give you a stronger voice for your health, your safety, higher wages, protections from racial discrimination and sexual harassment. Unions lift up workers, both union and non-union, and especially black and brown workers. The National Labor Relations Act didn't just say that unions are allowed to exist. It said that we should encourage unions. So let me be really clear. It's not up to me to decide whether anyone should join a union. But let me be even more clear. It's not up to an employer to decide that either. The choice to join a union is up to the workers. Full stop. Full stop. Today and over the next few days and weeks, workers in Alabama